What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I wanted to break down what's going on with the overall market and talk about some very important things affecting the market for tomorrow and beyond. I'm going to talk about what's going on with SPY, Tesla, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers, and what could end up playing out for the next couple of trading days given the big Apple event that's coming out very soon. But before I do anything like this, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I am firstly not a financial planner, so take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very soon, in just about 4 days, so check it out before they run out. Anyways, let's break down what's going on with the charts and the market for now. So just as a reminder for everyone, we don't really have any massive pieces of data coming out for Monday or Tuesday. We have the consumer inflationary expectations report at about 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern time. So this could cause some volatility depending on what the expectations are. Hopefully they're not like way too high. We're forecasting this to be like 3.4%. And then for Tuesday, right, we have the WASDE report at about 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern time or New York time. So that could cause some volatility, but nothing too crazy as well. None of this data is that massive for Monday or Tuesday. It won't be until Wednesday when we have CPI coming out an hour before the market opens for Wednesday. That's when we're going to see more and more crazy volatility. This is going to be very, very telling about the state of the economy and what the Fed is going to be doing next. Now, we're forecasting a slight increase in CPI, so that's going to be expected. So we'll see how much of an increase we end up getting, as that's most likely what's going to happen, given the big changes to services data that we saw earlier, and then also the gas prices going up, energy going up, and the cost of a barrel of oil also like continuing to rise. So that has to do with foreign policy and things like that. But we will talk more about this later on. We're not too focused on CPI just yet. What's going to be more impactful is going to be this right here. So Apple has a big event for September 12th. They could be launching the new iPhone 15. Now, what typically happens during events like this, just as a reminder, we tend to see Apple launch to the upside, push and push and push upwards, approaching events like this. Then after the event comes out, we tend to see Apple dump. That's what typically happens historically. That almost always that's what happens. So we'll see if that happens again this time around. There is a high probability of something like this happening. But I believe Apple is going to be the one to lead the way. And I'm going to talk about how this could affect the entire market. So on Apple, right, we had this bullish divergence that developed, and now we start to see this inverse head and shoulders structure that is developed on it as well. I can even pull up the chart on TradingView just to show you more details about it. But what's good about it is, Apple is showing some life and starting to establish a change in its market structure, making higher highs and higher lows. So this tells me that there's a high probability that Apple's going to try to continue to push up to fill this gap. We have a pre-market gap around 182. We might see Apple trying to push up approaching the event, but after the event, which is going to take like a couple of hours, because I think it starts at like 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. So it's going to take a couple of hours into Tuesday by the time this event happens. There could be a dump afterwards. There's a risk of that possibly happening because that's what tends to happen historically. So just as a reminder, we may pump approaching the event. We could see Apple reach the 180s again. I think there's a good chance it's going to try to pump in anticipation, of some really, really good news. And we might see Apple help the market pump. That's what's most likely going to happen, so long as there's no like bad news involving China or anything like that coming out. So I'm leaning more in the direction of that. This looking more bullish from a technical standpoint coming up here. I think Apple is going to lead the market up. So if you look at like Tesla, I know a lot of people want me to talk about Tesla first. Apple has the inverse head and shoulders, the bullish divergence, and the gap above that has not been filled yet. So there's more room for upside most likely. Tesla's very stationary. It's going to depend on the news for tomorrow. If the market does get a rebound, we could see Tesla try to hold above 250. If it does so, 252 could be tested, followed by 256. There's very, very tight resistance between 258 and 261, and also 256. I think there's a chance it's going to try to like pump a little bit as long as there's no bad news in the morning and get a retest of at least 252.5 before possibly rejecting, trading sideways from there. If you get a really bad piece of news, you want to watch this trend line. See, we have this trend line right here from the previous zones, like way back a couple of months ago. But if we break below this trend line, if Tesla breaks below like 248 going into tomorrow, this thing could start sinking a lot lower down to these levels again. But even if it does sink down, we have this demand zone, right? And Tesla's basically just been trading sideways. So, every time we hit the low, like 240s, we tend to see a lot of buyers stepping in. And when we hit like 260 to 258, we tend to see more sellers step in. So that's the reason why we might see Tesla just continue to trade sideways overall. And we'll see which direction it picks depending on the news. I'm hoping for a little pop with Apple tomorrow, and we should see Tesla try to make an attempt to push. So hopefully we get above 252.5 at the very least. And we'll see if Tesla could hold that. On SPY, something similar is going on, except I think Apple is going to have a big effect on SPY because, right, we have this inverse head and shoulders, kind of like a cup and handle like structure developing. We have this accumulation that was basically approaching it right over here. And we have this imbalance all the way up to about just under 448. So I believe this imbalance is going to push this thing up. And I think Apple is going to help it push up initially, approaching this event. We might see Apple push up. I think the odds favor that. And then after the event, who knows what's going to happen. But approaching the event, if Apple does pump for tomorrow, we should see SPY make an attempt to follow Apple, hit 447 or higher. We could even see 448 and a rejection. And this thing just kind of like trading sideways from there. But I think the odds do favor upside as we're making higher highs and higher lows. I think we're going to get a little pop approaching Apple's big event, and this is going to affect the entire market. I think the QQQ is going to follow the trend and also has an inverse head and shoulders structure that is still holding up quite nicely. We have this potential resistance zone all the way up here from these previous levels that also form. So we could be forming like this wedge on the QQQ. We're going to be watching it try to break like 375. We'll see if that breaks or not. If we do break it, I think it's going to push all the way up to this imbalance just under like 377, right? So we want to see it try to hold above 375. If it does so, it's going to push a lot higher. If it breaks down, we have the support so far. So this support is holding up nicely. If this breaks, if it 372 breaks, then it could sink all the way down to like 370, 368 down here. So you're going to be watching this support right over here. My guts tells me this is kind of like an inverse head and shoulders that's slanted. We're making higher highs and higher lows technically. My gut tells me it's going to kind of like cool off in the morning and start pushing higher and try to test 375, the top of this wedge. And we'll see if it could break or not. If it breaks, 377 is on the table. I think the QQQ is going to show some strength and try to close green, but we have to watch it first. Now we retype that, Nvda is in a very, very critical state right now because we have this demand zone. We're talking about this demand zone. We tend to see buyers step in here. So right about here, we tend to see a lot of buyers just continuing to step in. We touch this zone, we bounce, we touch it, then we bounce, touched it and bounced, right, over and over again. There's a good chance that, in my opinion, as long as we get the buyers that step in like they have been historically, you can see we have like a double bottom that potentially formed here. We touched this, we bounced, we touched it and bounced a little bit. So as long as there's no bad news, if there's like a very horrendous piece of news and we break 448, that's like the bearish case. I don't think that's going to happen based off the chart, and I'm not leaning in that direction. I think what's most likely going to happen is this. We may touch this one more time during the pre-market, this zone, and try to make an attempt to bounce to retest 465. So long as there's no bad news and Apple does hold the market up, we could make an attempt to fill this gap on Nvda and try to break above the resistance trend line and get very close to 470. First, we have to hold 465 and break it. Then I'm going to be expecting the gap to get filled to at least 470 if we break 465. And I think we're going to end up doing that. That's what I'm predicting for tomorrow, if not by Tuesday. I think there's going to be a small attempt to rebound for Nvda for the whole market. And now I just want to quickly go over just a couple of other stocks for the rest of the video. For Microsoft, when you look at this from a technical standpoint, we got a decent sized pump. There's a bearish divergence right here, which led it to kind of selling off a little bit on Friday. But here's the thing about it. It's holding its 20 EMA quite nicely. So watch it retest maybe 332, then bounce and attempt to go higher, because this is a very nice accumulation phase. To me, it looks like as of right now, it's not looking too bad. So there should be a bounce. And there may be an attempt to retest 337 above that. So I think Microsoft is going to cool off a bit, then try to push higher. If we look at AMD, like Nvidia, AMD tends to see very, very similar price action. But in my opinion, it's still looking a little weak on the 4-hour time frame. I would say that we're going to try to make an attempt to base at 105. So we might test that tomorrow. And if we get a bounce off that, it could try to push back up to 107 plus. Nvidia may help it bounce just a little bit. So we could see it try to get back to 107, maybe test 105 first and bounce off that. Looking at the HYG, this has a potential bullish cross on the 4-hour PPO. This is starting to look a little bit more bullish as the bond traders are starting to get in. If this starts pushing up, that's going to be good for the markets. Looking at the Nasdaq, this thing so far, let's actually go back to our 30 minutes time frame. The Nasdaq so far, it's made this attempt to fill this gap. It hasn't fully filled the gap yet. I think it actually came very close to filling it, but it looks like it's still trying to establish a higher low relative to before. We might gap down in the morning, maybe cool off a little bit, and then make an attempt higher. If Apple does drag this thing up, I could see it getting closer to like that 14,000 area. That is a real possibility. On SPX, I mean, what's worth noting about SPX would be this. On the 4-hour time frame, after getting that sell-off, right, it still is showing some signs of strength. It's trying to get above these EMAs, so we want to see it break above our 20 EMA and the 50 EMA too. We do have another gap all the way up here at like 449, 44.98. Sorry about that. We have a potential accumulation right here, so I could see it making attempts to go higher, but it really depends on if we could get above these EMAs. There's a chance it's going to try to do so. My gut tells me it's going to try because when you look at the VIX has a lot of gaps below, and it still is establishing these lows. So, if we come down to fill this gap, the VIX is still looking kind of weak. That could be another signal of the market potentially pushing. The dollar is at 105, but you could see it's getting hit by resistance at this 105 area. It hasn't really just broken through it very easily. So it has tough resistance. If the dollar does cool off just a little bit in a very healthy manner, it could help the market pump just a bit. There is a possibility of that. For Amazon, we're going to be watching this thing retest 137.6, bounce off that, then potentially push up to 140. I could see that very, very possibly. And if you look at the structure, we're starting to make higher highs and higher lows. So maybe a little cool off and then a push up to about this 140 area is on the table. Now, if you look at Meta, it's very boring, very flat. It's not really doing anything too significant. Going to be looking for it to try to hold above 300, our 50 EMA. If it breaks that, I think 305 could be retested. We have some tough resistance there as it's just kind of like trading sideways. Very boring, not really doing anything. So I think we might try to get above like 300 tomorrow, but it might just trade sideways for most of the day. So we're still in this channel on Meta. Nothing too fun is happening to it just yet. And the best thing to do is just wait for Apple's event and watch what Apple ends up doing. If Apple keeps pushing and pushing, it's going to push the market up as we have some unfilled gaps, right? On the daily chart, we have this big unfilled gap. Apple does have a doji that potentially formed, but will Apple really just reject? We need some bad news for that to happen. As of right now, it looks to me like Apple's going to try to go higher, making attempts to fill this gap. With the big event coming and some hype associated with it, if Apple fills this gap, it's going to push the markets higher. I think there's going to be an attempt to do so over the next 2 days. I think that could push the markets up, but then we'll see what happens after the big event. All right, so hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully this video gave you guys a good recap of how the market's looking. I know many people are getting lost into like football this Sunday, which is completely awesome. It's going to be very fun to watch like the first postseason games for many different teams. With that said, have a great day. Please take care, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Thank you, and peace out.